I remember Rice Krispies and white toast on our breakfast table that morning. It was my first day of third grade in Webster, New York, and I couldn't eat a thing. I was so full of energy, nervous energy, kind of like this. Riding the bus to school, we went all the way up 5 Mile Line Road toward Plank, and I saw a lot of empty farmland. Looked boring to me. That's why we could hear the cows from Bowman's farm that frightened us awake our first mornings in our new home off of 5 Mile Line Road. This was the late 60s, and my parents had moved us from an old city neighborhood in Syracuse, New York, to a brand new construction tract home on a new cul-de-sac. This was a huge deal for my parents, both second-generation Italians, and the first ones in either of their families to own a new home. It was a sign of success. They had arrived in the little country town where life is worth living. Walking into the classroom, I took a seat near the front, and I looked around at the other kids in the class, and I noticed that they had mostly fair skin and fair hair. Unlike my olive tone complexion, which had gotten even more tan over the summer, and my dark wavy hair that always had a mind of its own. So I sat in a school desk and looked down to admire my new school shoes, my favorite part of the first day of school. And then I began to wait nervously for this new teacher who would take attendance of this class for the first time. And I listened to so many simple and easy names that I wished had been mine. Susan Allen, here. Gary Avery, here. Donna Bell, here. And then there's a pause, and the teacher's looking down at the list, and I see her brow furrow. And I'm waiting for it and watching her mouth begin to form a new mispronunciation. Bonita, Bonita, Bana. She clears her throat, she's gonna give it another try. Bonita, Bonacracci. There's some laughter in the class, and the teacher looks up and scans the room, looking for the guilty party responsible for putting her in this difficult position. I raise my hand and say, "It's Bonnie, please." "Oh, Bonnie? So you don't want Bonita?" "No. Bonnie, please." "Okay. And how do you pronounce your last name?" I say, "It's Benassi." "Oh, okay. So not Bonacrat, no? Okay. Benassi, let's see. So Bonnie Benassi. The more she repeats it, the worse I feel. So much for your name being the most important word in the English language to you. I feel practically naked, and my new school outfit is doing nothing to help. And I notice the kids sitting in the few rows in front of me turn and look back at me over their shoulder. And then as they turn back around, I see the exchanged glances, and I see their shoulders shaking with laughter. And I decide next year, I will remember to sit in the front row and avoid all of this. I know my parents' hearts were in the right place when they named me. I just don't think they could have realized how uncomfortable it would be for me sitting in a classroom of mostly all American kids. My father would drive us back to Syracuse to visit his parents, my grandparents, pretty often. Syracuse was very different from Webster, New York. It was loud with the sounds of traffic and trucks and commerce and the large bells from Assumption Church that rang across the street from where my grandparents lived. My grandparents had come from Italy almost 50 years prior on a 2-week boat voyage from Naples to New York City. Even so, it still seemed to me like they lived in a very different world. Neither one of them ever learned to drive, they didn't own a car, and all of their vegetables came from their backyard garden. My grandfather had a little hat shop right in the front of his store, and all day long he was surrounded by the sounds of bubbling hot water and steam and the smell of turpentine, and he stood on a wood platform that he had fashioned for himself between a large boiler on one side and a large national cash register, the big brass ones, on the other side of him. He was Sam the Hatter. And during the day, I would hear him say his name many times when he was talking with customers or answering the phone, and he'd say, Sama Banach, Sama Banach. So once, after one of these trips, and we got back home, I asked my parents, why did Grandma and Grandpa say our name Bonacci and we say Bonassi? My father, who had been a proud enlisted United States Marine sergeant and had served in 2 wars, and so he could make the veins on his neck bulge when he answered. And he said, it's Bonassi! We're American! My mother explained, they're Italian, and so they say it the Italian way, but we're here in America now. But I wouldn't be the last one who would question how we said our name. In college, in the all-girls freshman dorm where I lived, our rooms were so small that we just left our doors open. So we became fast friends with the girls whose room was directly across the hall from ours. And though I'd explained to them that my name was Bonassi, they didn't accept that. And immediately turned it into Banuch, which they would call down the hall or at parties or across campus to get my attention. It felt a little rough for my liking, especially with the accent on the nooch. And it just seemed to be a full frontal, in-your-face declaration of, she's Italian. But somehow it always made people smile, including me. It turns out I wouldn't be, how I said my name would start to reveal what I thought of myself. After college, I moved directly to New York City, even though I'd never once been there. But I wanted to work in advertising. I felt that's where I had to be. I only knew one person. It was my college roommate, and she had moved there, and she had an apartment, and she was willing to share it. This was the early 80s. My grandpa had died, and cell phones and GPS weren't invented yet. So I took a map of Manhattan, and I reduced it again and again and again until it was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, so I could navigate my way to my first job interview and look like I knew where I was going, even though I didn't. My first job was a small ad agency directly on Madison Avenue. And at lunch, I would walk a few blocks west, and I'd get to go and look around in Macy's. I felt like I was in the center of the universe, living and working in New York City, while Webster, New York might as well have been at the other end of the universe. In fact, my boyfriend and current husband who I met in New York. He was actually from the posh town of Darien, Connecticut. He once referred to my hometown of Webster as Walnut, New York. When I tried to correct him, he said, "What's the difference?" I couldn't argue. I didn't plan to go back there anyhow. So one day I was sitting at my desk at this little agency and my phone rang. And I answered it, Bonnie Benassi. And the caller said, "Sorry, what was that name?" So I repeated it, Bonnie Benassi. And the caller said, "That's a strange name. How do you spell that?" And so I spelled it, Bonacci. And then he assessed, "That's Italian, right?" I'd been outed. And I confessed, yes. And then, stepping across a line, this caller said to me, "It's Bonacci, not Benassi. It's Italian. Why are you saying it that way?" I mean, here was a complete stranger. And yet, when he said Bonacci, I recognized my grandpa's voice. I didn't have a good answer besides, well, it's the way my parents always said it. But I realized I had been carrying their baggage from their past and bringing it with me into my future. Until this caller, this stranger, let me know that it was okay to be Italian. And so from that moment on, I changed how I said my name. Thank you.